Thank you for tuning in to the Golden State Media Concepts football podcast, where we discuss the latest news, rumors, and games of the NFL and college football. As always, I'm your host, Jeremiah, and it is January 17th, 2017, episode 156 of the podcast. And we got a lot to talk about today. And it looks like we might see the return of Chip Kelly on the sideline. I will get a little bit more into that. And there is one coaching vacancy left in the NFL, and that is the San Francisco 49ers, which is the team that Chip Kelly coached last season. There were two favorites for the head coaching vacancy. One of them decided to drop out of the position, and it looks like they're honing in on the other candidate, the 49ers, that is. And it looks like Jerry Jones had something to say regarding Tony Romo and the Dallas Cowboys after the teams lost in the division round against the Packers. And we did talk about Bo Jackson on the show a little bit last week, and he did have some concerns regarding a current NFL quarterback, and I will get more into that at the end of the show. But first things first, I want to get into this Chip Kelly news that came out yesterday. Chip Kelly had interviewed with the Jaguars about the offensive coordinator position. Yes, according to a league source at ESPN. Kelly met with Shah Khan, the owner of the Jaguars, and I think Chip Kelly, being a possible fit for the offensive coordinator position, I think it is absolutely great. I love this move. I think with that type of offense, they have really good pieces on that offense. You know, we saw about 2 years ago what this offense could potentially do. You know, Allen Robinson, you got Allen Hurns there. Blake Bortles, I think, can thrive in a Chip Kelly scheme. I just think the main problem for this team is finding ways to run the football. And they couldn't do that this year with TJ Yeldon, and they couldn't do that with Chris Ivory. They did have some success throughout the season here and there, but they're very inconsistent. But I do like Chip Kelly as an offensive coordinator, and I said, you know, if he's not going to coach in the college ranks as the head coach, then I would like to see him in the NFL as a coordinator, because I don't know if he can be an NFL coach. I just don't think his scheme is well equipped for the NFL, and we see that he hasn't proven himself as a head coach, but as an offensive coordinator, it gives him a chance to solidify himself as an offensive mastermind, as what he has been considered to be when he was at Oregon and when he was coming to Philadelphia. But, you know, Kelly did have a 27-21 record with Philadelphia in 3 seasons. That included back-to-back 10-6 seasons, even though he went to the playoff one time. And then with the 49ers, he went 2-14, but he did get fired by Trent Baalke, even though Trent Baalke's not even there anymore. He didn't really have a whole lot to work with there in San Francisco, so I kind of think he deserved the other year. But I do think he's going to a team with a lot more talent on offense. I think there's a lot more talent there in the Jacksonville Jaguars offense there. I love that receiving core. You know, I talked about Allen Robinson, Allen Hurns. I didn't get to talk about Marquise Lee. He made some really great plays. He was phenomenal this year for the Jacksonville Jaguars. I think he even led the team in receiving at times. And then they need to find some way to get this running game back on track. They need to find a running back. And the thing about a Chip Kelly offense is that it's put a strain on the defense, but the fact that Chip Kelly is not at the top of, of coaching the team, I think it might be a little bit better because, he doesn't have to manage the whole entire team. He just gets to manage the offense. Because we do know in the Chip Kelly team, every defense is really bad on the Chip Kelly team. Every Chip Kelly coach team has bad defense. So I do think that for the Jaguars, I think this is the chance to have their offense improve, because their offense was atrocious this year. There was times when they just couldn't get the ball down the field. Outside of their 3-win season, they were 25th in points per game, 19.9 points a game. They were 23rd in yards per game, 20th pass yards per game, and 22nd in rush yards per game. They just couldn't find anybody. They just couldn't do anything a whole lot on offense. They really couldn't. Well, I do like this move because of the young core there. We did see Blake Bortles struggle there. He does have more pick sixes than he does in wins, but he's about to be in his, I believe, third or fourth year in the league, and I do think 2017 is going to be a make or break year for Blake Bortles, and I do think Chip Kelly is the best thing that's going to happen to him. Blake Bortles is one of the problems this year. The receiving core was very inconsistent. Allen Robinson was very inconsistent. Allen Hurns had a really down year after having a phenomenal 2015. Marcus Lee emerged as a top target there. And then the leading rusher for this team was TJ Yeldon at 465. And I just think that's kind of flat out embarrassing. And I actually like TJ Yeldon coming out of college. I really did. Maybe it's the scheme that he's in, but hopefully the scheme that he will be in now will change that. But I do think Chip Kelly is going to be the best thing for this young Jacksonville offense. We talked very highly of this Jacksonville team, probably during the offseason, and I thought they were going to be a sleeper team. I really thought they were going to compete in the AFC South, but they just looked like flat. And I remember the game against the Raiders that the Jaguars played, I think in October. This team, they look like they couldn't even win a game. I picked them to win the AFC South, and by then, I think they had like one win or two. And I said, this team looks like they can't even win a game. They can't even drive the ball down the field. Like, it was embarrassing to watch this team. And no, they did have a pretty good core defense. I would admit that. They do have a pretty good core defense. I do like the defense that Dave Caldwell has built there. I do like the young core that they have there. They were sixth. They were sixth in total yards allowed. And, they drafted really well in that side of the ball. So I think the defense is the strength of this team, even though their offense is pretty much trash. So with the defense playing really well last year, being the 6th ranked defense in terms of yards per game, if this offense happens to catch up and then Chip Kelly works his magic, on Blake Bortles and the rest of the offensive players, I think this can be a real good team. And remember, the AFC South is no juggernaut. The team that won this division doesn't even have a legitimate quarterback. And the Houston Texans haven't had a legitimate quarterback in 4 or 5 years. The Houston Texans have run the AFC South when Andrew Luck is not in the playoffs. And don't forget, Andrew Luck is in this division too, but that organization just as dysfunctional as the Jaguars is. And I think the team to look out for in this division is the Tennessee Titans. They're literally one win away from the playoffs. And I think if they get some solid receivers there from Marcus Mariota, I think this is going to be the team to watch in this division and in the league. But I do like the potential move of Chip Kelly coming to Jacksonville because it can bode well for this young offense, and I think it can help Blake Bortles' career. Well, I'm going to take my first break, and when I get back, I'm going to talk about the former team that Chip Kelly coached, and that is the San Francisco 49ers. They are the only ones with a head coaching vacancy. One of the favorites decided to drop out as a candidate, and it looks like they're honing in on the other one. I will talk about that when we get back to the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
As for the last coaching vacancy in the NFL, the San Francisco 49ers had one of their top candidates, or one of the favorites to land a job, withdrawing his name from consideration. And that is Patriots offensive coordinator Josh McDaniels. He said that he is going to stay put in New England. And he said at this time, it's just best for my family and myself to remain here in New England and focus on this year's playoffs and finish the year however it turns out. So, with Josh McDaniels now not in consideration, that means Kyle Shanahan is the favorite to land a job. So, either way, I think, honestly, Kyle Shanahan is probably a better candidate than Josh McDaniels anyway. And throughout early part of January, I said Josh McDaniels is probably the guy to get this job. Because I really thought Kyle Shanahan was going to go to Denver. That's why I thought Josh McDaniels will be the guy to get this job. And I think if the Niners were to try to acquire Jimmy Garoppolo with Josh McDaniels and then get Louis Riddick as the GM, I think that would have been a really good trio. But with Kyle Shanahan, I do like that move better. Kyle Shanahan has worked with guys like Matt Schaub. He's worked with RG3. He's worked with he's literally turned around Matt Ryan's career. We saw how the Atlanta Falcons offense is. They couldn't be stopped on Saturday. But honestly, no matter who is the coach for this team, they're going to be bad for a while. They're going to be bad for at least probably 3 years. I think whoever decides to come to this team is going to have their hands full, and they're going to have a 3-year project. So, and Kyle Shanahan's actually not the only candidate anyway. The other candidate is Tom Cable, the offensive line coach in Seattle, who also coached the Oakland Raiders. And I think his record is 17-27. I remember that on top of my head, but it's something like that. He went under 500. And, I can talk about Tom Cable and why he shouldn't be, but to me, he's proved he's not mature enough to be an NFL coach. And when he was in Oakland, he had some off-the-field issues, and that's why I don't think he's perfect to come to this type of team right now. But that's why I think the Niners have to go all in on Kyle Shanahan. So no matter, as of right now, it looks like there's not really a quarterback for the team. Blaine Gabber's a free agent. Christian Ponder is a free agent. Colin Kaepernick, he probably will opt out of his contract. I wouldn't be surprised. But if Colin Kaepernick decides to stay with the 49ers, I think Kyle Shanahan can really help him improve his game. And I'm not going to say if Colin Kaepernick and Kyle Shanahan, I'm not going to say this team is a Super Bowl contender. This team is far a Super Bowl contender. They need to build this team starting with the draft this spring. But this offense in general was atrocious. I can talk about the defense, how they were the worst defense in NFL history. This is the worst defense I've ever seen. I can talk all day about it. But I'm not. I want to focus on their offense because their coach, their potential head coach, Kyle Shanahan, is an offensive guy. And that's what they need. They don't know. They just couldn't score points. They couldn't stop people from scoring. And this team was worse than the Jaguars. They were close to being worse than the Browns. They were just as bad as the Browns this year. Well, the 49ers, they were 27th in points, 19.3. 308.1, which is 31st. And they're 32nd in passing yards, 181.9, and they were 4th in rushing yards. So they do have some success running the ball. Maybe that's because Colin Kaepernick does help with the running game, or at least he did. But I do think if Kyle Shanahan decides to take this job, I think Colin Kaepernick should stay. I really do think Colin Kaepernick should stay because I think this is one of the guys that has a very successful track record of working with quarterbacks. The only time Kyle Shanahan did not work out was in Cleveland in 2014. But that is Cleveland. No one ever succeeds in Cleveland. And if you do, you're probably going to get cursed. But enough about that. If Kyle Shanahan becomes the coach, I do think it would help Colin Kaepernick. And I do think he should stay. Colin Kaepernick's numbers, despite the team being 2-14, he's actually been really good. He was really good. He threw 16 touchdowns, only threw 4 picks. He had a 90.7 quarterback rating, and he was 59.2 completion percentage. So his stats weren't really all that bad. It's just that the team around him was atrocious. He's throwing to guys named Quinn Penn, Vance McDonald, guys that wouldn't even be a starter in an NFL team. He's throwing. They have a lot of number 3, number 4 receivers, and they're the starters on this team. That's just how bad. That's just terrible drafting this team has had. And going back to Colin Kaepernick's numbers, his numbers were really successful in the running game. He had 468 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns. And he did have a pretty bad game in Chicago this year. He went 1 for 5 for 4 yards. Outside of that game, he's been really good. He has proved that he can be capable of driving this team down the field, but this team in general is just not talented. Colin Kaepernick was their best player in my opinion, and I do think they should build around him. And I do think if Kyle Shanahan becomes the coach, I think it can be a really good marriage for the both of them. And I'm not saying Kyle Shanahan is going to be Jim Harbaugh and take this team to the NFC Championship in 1 year. No, this team is far less talented than the team that Jim Harbaugh inherited. If Kyle Shanahan takes this job, there's going to be a lot of expectations, but I think they're going to be lower than they have been. They're going to be expectations to get better in the future, and I do think there's potential that this offense can be improved. If Colin Kaepernick does come back, I think he can have an even better year. And, I just said his numbers. He threw 16 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, 90.7 quarterback rating. Those aren't bad numbers. If Colin Kaepernick had those numbers if he was playing in Denver, Denver would have been a Super Bowl contender. I think Colin Kaepernick, because we've seen Colin Kaepernick get there before. I think Colin Kaepernick would have got them to the playoffs, and who knows, maybe to a Super Bowl. But we'll see if Kyle Shanahan does take this job, and we'll see if the 49ers decide to go with Tom Cable. And if they do within the next 24 hours, then, of course, I will talk about it. But I'm going to take my final break, and I'm going to get into some news about good old Jerry Jones regarding comments on Tony Romo and Bo Jackson voicing his opinion or concern on a quarterback in the NFL. So we'll talk about those when we get back to the Going to Me Concepts football podcast.
Want to find out what movies to go see? Then check out the GSMC Movie Podcast. It's your ticket to the latest movies, whether it's a new blockbuster event, romantic, comedy, or action flick. This show has got it all covered. They talk some what to go see now, don't bother, what's hot on Netflix, and everything in between. That's GSMCpodcast.com/movie-podcast. When it's all about the movies, it has to be this new show. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
With the Cowboys losing to the Packers on Sunday in the divisional round, Jerry Jones did not put a time frame on when and if the franchise will make a decision regarding Tony Romo. Yes, Jerry Jones was on 105.3 The Fan in Dallas, and this is what he had to say regarding the veteran quarterback. Quote, "There's several cards to be played. Don't think for 1 minute you see something written or something said about what and where Romo is going to be relative to our team. There any credibility to it. There's only one that can make that decision, and there's been no decision made." And, of course, when he was saying that there's only one that can make that decision, that is him. So, basically, the future of Tony Romo will fall on Jerry Jones. So, whether Jerry Jones wants to keep Tony Romo or trade him, that falls on Jerry Jones. And I think, I've been saying this the entire year, I think the Cowboys should trade Tony Romo. They can get really good value for him. And I know he's been hurt, but man, he can still... Tony Romo's been one of the most underrated, underappreciated quarterbacks in modern NFL. I really do believe that. We've seen what Tony Romo can do when he's fully healthy. He can make plays. And I'm not saying he can go out there and be like Aaron Rodgers. I'm saying he's capable of doing that. But when Jerry Jones in this interview, he reiterated his belief that Tony Romo will play in the Super Bowl if he can remain healthy. Is he talking about maybe if he can play with the Cowboys in that Super Bowl or another team? I don't know. I think if Jerry Jones saw Tony Romo play in the Super Bowl with another team, I think he will feel like he's being cheated on. I really do think so. Romo has played in parts of 5 games over the last 2 seasons because of collarbone, back injuries, and Jones still thinks he's an upper echelon quarterback, and I think he still has some good years left in him. You just got to know how to protect him. And don't get me wrong, Tony Romo was the way he handled the situation of Dak Prescott taking over as a starting quarterback for the Cowboys. He handled that very well. He handled that like he should have. But as far as 2017 goes, no, I think Tony Romo wants to be a starter. And if that's not with the Cowboys, then I think he should go to Denver or Houston. Even though Denver wants to work more with the young quarterbacks there in Trevor Siemian and Paxton Lynch, even though they might not be interested in Romo, I do think they should be. Because with that defense in Denver, with Tony Romo, that's a Super Bowl contender. But Houston is the perfect destination for Tony Romo because this defense can flat out ball. I'm telling you right now. Houston's defense can flat out ball. Jadeveon Clowney's healthy. They didn't even play with J.J. Watt and Jonathan Joseph, 2 of the best defensive players. With those 2 guys coming back, this defense is going to be even better. They're in a very weak division, though the strongest quarterback. He's actually I think he might be in a tough division next year, actually. Because, they have the Colts with Andrew Luck, and I know what I said earlier about them being dysfunctional front office and all that, but they still have Andrew Luck. Andrew Luck is still a good quarterback. And they got the Tennessee Titans, who I think is going to be a playoff team next year. They were literally 1 win away. And the Jaguars, I don't know how they're going to look like. But if they do get Chip Kelly as offensive coordinator, I think they can have potentially be better with that offense there. And they have a very good defense. But with the Texans, with Tony Romo, with that defense, this is a Super Bowl contender, no doubt about it. Because we've seen how they can play against a very good offense in New England. And they held them in check for a majority of 3 quarters. It's just that their offense just couldn't score. So the future of Tony Romo relies on Jerry Jones, and I do think Jerry Jones is going to be very reluctant to trade him. But I just think there's going to be an offer he can't refuse, and he's going to have to pull the trigger because I do think they can get some trade picks for Romo. And I think the Cowboys need to work on their defense, and I think they can use those trade picks, those draft picks that they got in exchange for Tony Romo on some defense. Well, for the final story of the day, we talked about this new USA Today Sports article about Bo Jackson. We talked about briefly, I think, on either Friday's show or Thursday's show. I don't know. But we did talk about briefly last week, and Bo Jackson said he voices concerns over Carolina Panthers quarterback Cam Newton. And remember, Bo Jackson and Cam Newton did win the Heisman in Auburn, so they do have the ties there, but they do have a very close relationship outside of football. Well, Jackson told USA Today that it scares the hell out of me every time he sees Cam Newton take a hit. Bo, did say he would never let his kid play football, and he sees Cam Newton as a son. Jackson said, quote, "The person I love in the NFL like my own son is Cam Newton. I cuss him out like my own son. But every time he takes a hit to his head, that scares me. It scares the hell out of me." And we've seen Cam Newton take all these hits all the time. You know, remember Cam Newton did get a concussion earlier this year, week 4 against Atlanta when he tried to score on that 2-point conversion. Cam Newton actually spoke out in December regarding his teammate Luke Kuechly, who was out for the final 3 games after he cleared for the concussion protocol. Cam Newton said, "I don't think for me I would want to jeopardize that for a long-term issue to bring Kuechly back." And, Cam Newton's a guy that had a concussion earlier this year, and then he saw his teammate suffer one. And Luke Kuechly is probably a top 3, top 2 defensive player in this league. And, Cam Newton's right. You have to think about him long term. There's more than life than football, and I think Cam Newton's one of those guys that sees that. And we see these hits on Cam Newton because they don't get called a lot. Maybe it's because he's a running quarterback, but there is some hits that do not get called. And even Newton does see it. He does see it. He's been frustrated by the officials by not calling these penalties that are considered illegal. So I do have a problem with the way that the officials do call these hits on Cam Newton and a lot of these other running quarterbacks. And I can see the concern with Bo Jackson with the amount of time that Cam Newton does run with the football. So he's going to get a lot of these. He's going to get a lot of these calls. Well, I should say, Cam Newton's not going to get a lot of these calls because the fact that he is a running quarterback. And it's a shame, he does take a lot of hits that I do think that should be called. And I have to agree with Bo Jackson. I do get scared when Cam Newton does take these hits too. And I don't even know him. He's a human being playing a sport. And I know that people are going to get hurt in the sports, but when Cam Newton doesn't get any of these hits, I think it's a concern for the league and a lot of kids watching. So yeah, I do agree with Bo Jackson about being scared, and I do agree that Newton should get some of these calls because I do think he gets hit. He does take a lot of hits, and the officials do not call it. But that does it for me today on the GSMC Football Podcast. I'd like to thank you guys for tuning in. Of course, I'll be back tomorrow. Anthony will be here as well, and we will discuss anything there is to know in the world of football. Any news that happens in the next 24 hours. I just want to say, have a good day. Have a pleasant tomorrow.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.